All right, let's continue on, and we are getting to Jon II. Jon II is where Jon prepares to leave Winterfell. This is the famous "It should have been you" giving needle chapter. In this chapter, it was a very good chapter. This is where Jon really shows exceptional ability to sympathize, empathize with people. That's somewhat lost. I mean, he's definitely a caring individual later on, but in this chapter, considering he's a teenager, he is able to read people and act appropriately on a very high level. And so, but let's get into it. So, Jon climbed the steps slowly, trying not to think that this might be the last time ever. Ghost padded silently beside him. Outside, the snow swirled through the castle gates, and the yard was all noise and chaos. But inside the thick stone walls, it was still quiet and warm. So again, like we're getting this idea that Winterfell is geothermally heated and warm, though kind of goes against the idea of the hearth tales it supports the Catelyn story that it's very, very warm inside Winterfell. Too quiet to Jon's liking. He reached the landing and stood for a long moment, afraid. Ghost nuzzled at his hand. He took courage from that. He straightened and entered the room. Lady Stark was there beside his bed. She had been there day and night for close on a fortnight. Not for a moment had she left Bran's side. She had her meals brought to her here, and her chamber pots as well. This is just one of these things, like one of those scenes we don't think about, like Catelyn like shitting beside Bran in his bed because she won't leave his side. But nonetheless, and a small hard bed to sleep on, though it was said she had scarcely slept at all. She fed him herself, the honey and water, an herb mixture that sustained life. Again, getting back to this, like feeding. This was mentioned before, but the idea of like feeding people that need to be fed, that can't. This has just been a running theme. Not once did she leave the room, so Jon had stayed away. But now there was no more time. He stood in the door a moment, afraid to speak, afraid to come closer. The window was open. Below, a wolf howled. Ghost heard and lifted his head. I imagine this is the idea that this is summer outside calling, sensing that Jon is near. Lady Stark looked over. For a moment, she did not seem to recognize him. Finally, she blinked. George R.R. Martin really likes to use blink for confusion or recognition or something. What are you doing here? She asked, in a voice strangely flat and emotionless. I came to see Bran, Jon said, to say goodbye. Her face did not change. Her long auburn hair was dull and tangled. She looked as though she had aged 20 years. You said it. Now go away. Part of him wanted only to flee, but he knew if he did, he might never see Bran again. He took a nervous step into the room. Please, he said. Something cold moved in her eyes. I told you to leave, she said. We don't want you here. Now, this chapter essentially has 3 parts. It's Jon and Cat with Bran, Jon and Robb, and Jon and Arya. And the latter 2 plots, Jon and Robb, plays into the plot later on in a Game of Thrones where Jon defects, and is brought back. And then the Arya plot plays in, his connection with Arya plays in A Dance with Dragons, where he defects again. Which brings people to wonder about the first plot. Like, will there be resolution to the Cat Jon storyline here that's introduced here, because Cat actually rarely thinks about Jon after this. Is this scene about Jon and Cat, or is it about Jon and Bran? So a lot of people say, like, oh, doesn't the plot demand that Lady Stoneheart meet Jon and there be some sort of resolution? I don't know. Maybe this scene is here because it's Jon and Bran and it's really about Jon and Bran's relationship, or maybe this is something that, George put in and never came back to it. But, the latter two parts of this chapter are very, very important. Jon's relationship with Robb, Jon's relationship with Arya, because he doesn't have that with others. It's not like there needs to be a Jon relationship with Sansa resolved, a Jon relationship with Rickon resolved. He doesn't care about those siblings. Like, he cares about Robb, Bran, Arya. Anyway, once that would have sent him running, but now it only made him angry. He would be a sworn brother of the Night's Watch soon and face worse dangers than Catelyn Tully Stark. He's my brother, he said. Shall I call the guards? Call them, Jon said, defiant. You can't stop me from seeing him. He crossed the room, keeping the bed between him, and looked down on Bran where he lay. She was holding one of his hands. It looked like a claw. This was not the Bran he remembered. The flesh had all gone from him. His skin stretched tight over his bones like sticks. Under the blankets, his legs bent in ways that made Jon sick. His eyes were sunk deep into black pits, open. But they saw nothing. That's the weird thing. His eyes are actually open. We don't think about that. The fall had shrunken him somehow. He looked half a leaf, as if the first strong wind would carry him off to his grave. I will say, having had someone in my life get hit by a car and go into a coma for a few weeks, I will say that it is a Hollywood invention of the peaceful coma. Okay, there's not the peaceful coma where someone is sitting there like Sleeping Beauty and then wakes up and is perfectly fine afterwards mentally. That's just not something that exists. Like, when people are in comas, they move around, they grind their teeth, they sweat, they twitch. It's they don't look beautiful. And if you don't wake up in a few days, you have brain damage. And that's just the sad reality of it. So we are given a Hollywood coma here with Bran. But, the fact that he wakes up and he doesn't have any brain damage after clearly being asleep for weeks, it seems. I mean, his flesh is off him, at least a couple weeks. He's lost a lot of weight, so it's definitely not days. Nonetheless, we get the Hollywood convention of the beautiful coma. Yet under the frail cage of those shattered ribs, his chest rose and fell with each shallow breath. Not to mention things like bed sores and all sorts of stuff that happens. Bran, he said, I'm sorry I didn't come before. I was afraid. He could see the tears rolling down his cheeks. He could feel the tears rolling down his cheeks. Jon no longer cared. Don't die, Bran, please. We're all waiting for you to wake up. Me and Robb and the girls, everyone. And that's this idea that somehow a medieval society that doesn't really have very much experience with comas would know anything about what would happen. Like, again, like, we have this Hollywood impression of what comas are like. So everybody thinks they understand a coma, but they don't have that in this society. So this idea of like, we're waiting for you to wake up and be fine is very weird to me. But anyway, that's just me. I know most, when it comes to regular storytelling, it's that we find in fiction, this is the way things are. But realistically, why would anyone in this pseudo medieval society like expect Bran to be waking up and be fine? Like how many coma, do they have a record of coma patients? Do the maesters know all about comas? Anyway, Lady Stark was watching. She had not raised a cry. Jon took that for acceptance. Outside the window, the direwolf howled again. The wolf that Bran had not time to name. I guess this is the idea of Bran somehow calling to Jon here through the direwolf, I would imagine. I have to go now, Jon said. Uncle Benjen is waiting. I'm going north to the wall. We have to leave today before the snows come. Yeah, the weather's always kind of funny because they spend they say they have to leave today before the snows come, but it's a 3-week trip. They're going to get hit by snows no matter what. And Tyrion's going to head back, and it's kind of funny. You remember how excited Bran had been at the prospect of the journey. It was more than he could bear. The thought of leaving him behind like this. Jon brushed away his tears, leaned over and kissed his brother lightly on his lips. I wanted him to stay here with me, Lady Stark said softly. Jon watched her, wary. This is the observant Jon, observant and connecting Jon. Okay, now, keep in mind, Jon's 15 years old here. So she was not looking at him, but she was talking to him. But for a part of her, it was as though he were not even in the room. I prayed for it, she said dully. He was my special boy. I went to the sept and prayed 7 times to the 7 faces of God that Ned would change his mind and leave him here with me. Sometimes prayers are answered. Yeah, really weird that Catelyn has this special relationship to Bran, which is the middle child. It's one thing if it's oh, my favorite's the baby or my favorite's the eldest. It's odd that Catelyn has this affection for Bran, the middle one. He was my special boy. Okay. Yeah. Funny, because most parents try to pride themselves on treating their kids equally. But if there's going to be a bias, famously, the bias is either for the eldest or for the youngest, which Bran is neither. Jon did not know what to say. It wasn't your fault, he managed after an awkward silence. Not a bad response for a 15-year-old in this situation. Her eyes found him. They were full of poison. I need none of your absolution, bastard. Oh. Jon lowered his eyes. She was cradling one of Bran's hands. He took the other, squeezed it, fingers like bones of birds. Goodbye, he said. He was out the door when she called out to him. Jon, she said. He should have kept going, but she had never called him by his name before. That's pretty intense, right? She'd never said the word Jon in 15 years. Never said Jon. It's just so weird, right? I mean, He turned to find her face as if he was seeing it for the first time. Yes, he said. It should have been you, she told him. Then she turned back to Bran and began to weep, her whole body shaking with sobs. Jon had never seen her cry before. Almost unrealistically mean, right? It's super cold. I think everybody remembers how cold this is, and it's this chapter is so intense because it really colors everybody's opinions of Catelyn. There's so many Catelyn haters, and they all go back to this chapter, this almost unrealistic level of cruelty to randomly say to some kid who's done nothing that the person who should be dead and crippled should not be Bran. It should be you randomly, even though Jon doesn't like climbing or anything like that. It should have been you. How the phrase doesn't even make sense. Because Jon wasn't even in the particular condition, the situation to have it happen to him. But for her to be you should be the one smashed up, crippled and dying. It's it's a level of meanness and cruelty that goes beyond even anything I can imagine Cersei doing. Not that Cersei isn't really mean, but she's mean in context, like she's mean. She doesn't just come out with something out of nowhere and just like savagely, say something to somebody. It's over the top. I think that's why they cut this line from the show. It's so over the top and it colors people so much on Cat. And Cat's personality is nothing like this after this. It's just this one moment of, oh my God, really? You're going to be that mean to this boy who has done nothing. He's done nothing. And it's just like, ugh. It should have been you who fell from a tower and became paralyzed from the neck down. And from the waist down and probably, it might die, it's just, so I'm surprised Jon doesn't cry here because it's just like brutally mean. It was a long walk down to the yard. Yeah. Outside, everything was noise and confusion. Wagons were being loaded. Men were shouting. Horses were being harnessed and saddled and led from the stable. A light snow had begun to fall, and everyone was in an uproar to be off. You're going to be going through the snow no matter what. But Robb was in the middle of it, shouting commands with the best of them. He seemed to have grown of late, as if Bran's fall and his mother's collapse had somehow made him stronger. Craywood was at his side. Uncle Benjen is looking for you, he told Jon. He wanted to be gone an hour ago. I know, Jon said. Soon. He looked around at all the noise and confusion. Leaving is harder than I thought. For me too, Robb said. He had snow in his hair, melting from the heat of his body. The snowflakes in the hair, it comes back. It comes back later with Sam, as Sam kind of becomes like Jon's like new brother. He the snowflake, just this little memory of snowflakes melting in his hair is just something that's in Jon's head. Did you see him? Jon nodded, trusting him, not trusting himself to speak. Obviously, he's probably on the verge of tears here. He's not going to die, Robb said. I know it. You Starks are hard to kill, Jon agreed. I don't know why he would say that, but because Starks are no harder to kill than anybody else. I'm sure he knows about his uncle Brandon and his grandfather, and his voice was flat and tired. The visit had taken all the strength from him. Robb knew something was wrong. My mother. And here is Jon being very, very mature for a 15-year-old boy. Even though she just said the meanest freaking thing that anyone could possibly say for no reason at all, he says, she was very kind, Jon told him. Incredible emotional intelligence. Robb was relieved. Good, he smiled. The next time I see you, you'll be in all black. Jon forced himself to smile back. It was always my color. How long do you think it'll be? Soon enough, Robb promised. He pulled Jon to him and embraced him fiercely. Farewell, Snow. Jon hugged him back. And you, Stark, take care of Bran. I will. They broke apart and looked at each other awkwardly. Uncle Benjen said to send you to the stables if I saw you. It's interesting because I was talking about when they use Uncle Ben versus Uncle Benjen. Yeah, I guess this is actually the last chapter. They'll actually say Uncle Ben at one point in this chapter, but it's like one of the last times they ever say Uncle Ben, and start switching to Uncle Benjen. I have one more farewell to make, Jon told him. Then I haven't seen you. Robb replied. Jon left him standing there in the snow, surrounded by wagons and wolves and horses. was a short walk to the armory. He picked up his package and took the covered bridge across the keep. And so this little exchange, like, even though it's just goodbyes, and it's fairly, fairly cursory. All the love is implied underneath. But it's so very important for the end of the book. Like, if you didn't have this, like John leaving the Night's Watch doesn't make any sense. So it's like, this is a very, very important scene. And it's funny because this was written so many years before, like, the later chapter of his desertion. But very, very important scene to have this, even though nothing happens in it. But it's very, very essential for the characters to establish that between them. Arya was in her room packing a polished ironwood chest that was bigger than she was. Nymeria was helping. Arya would only have to point, and the wolf bound across the room, snatched up whisks of silk in her jaws, and fetch it back. But when she smelled ghosts, she sat down on her haunches and yelped at them. Arya glanced behind her, saw Jon, and jumped to her feet. She threw her skinny arms tight around his neck. "I was afraid you were gone," she said, her breath catching in her throat. "They wouldn't let me out to say goodbye." What did you do now?" Arya disentangled herself from him and made a face. "Nothing. I was all packed and everything." She gestured to the huge chest, no more than a third full, and at the clothes that were scattered all over the room. "Septim Ordain says I have to do it all over. My things weren't properly folded," she says. "A proper southern lady doesn't just throw her clothes inside the chest like old rags," she said. Yeah, I don't, kind of weird. I mean, this is some minor thing, but it's like, why did she undo her chest and spread the clothes all around the room so the dog could, like, the dog is bounding across the room. The things aren't just like, she didn't just like pull the clothes out like next to the chest. They're all over the room. Because the direwolf was running across. So it wasn't very efficient. I mean, maybe Arya purposely like spread them all around the room so that she had more time to run into Jon. That's my only guess, or it's just he wanted to have the direwolf doing work for her. And it didn't really make sense, because if you're repacking a chest, you're just going to pull everything out and put it right next to the chest and then start folding. Right. But whatever. Of course, in George R. R. Martin's original plan, Jon and Arya were going to become lovers. There was a romantic element to their relationship, but that's been changed, I think. Is this what you did, little sister? Is that what you did, little sister? Well, they're going to get all messed up anyway. And who cares how they're folded? Septim Ordain, Jon told her. I don't think she'd like Nymeria helping either. The she-wolf regarded him silently with dark golden eyes. It's just as well. I have something for you to take with you, and it has been packed very carefully. Her face lit up. A present. You could call it that. Close the door. Now, I want you to think about how, like, really thoughtful this gift is. This isn't just he got her a sword. Okay. The last chapter established that she, like, left her needlework, had an emotional breakdown. Jon recognized that she had an emotional breakdown over it, ran over to where he was. She watched the sword fighting, what she was really interested in, and, felt that the world was not fair, because she was forced into the woman's role box, and what she was really interested in was in the man's role box. And then Jon, after that incident, was like, what would be a good going away present for Arya that really speaks to her? Oh, I know. A needle like dueling blade to emphasize, that she's doing needlework, but she's doing sword work like the boys. That it is, the gift is as gender bending as she is, that it represents the needle, it represents the women, it represents the man because it's sword fighting. It represents that day where they were together, and she was in such an emotional, like such an emotional wreck. And he'd gone to the smith, and keep in mind that, like, you know, it takes like 40 man hours to make one of these things. Like, he went to him, and like the smith has been working on this for days, to make this special blade. I mean, it's a very, very, very thoughtful gift from Jon. Shows a level of emotional intelligence that's well beyond a 15-year-old, or anything Jon like demonstrates later on. He is like, it's early Game of Thrones Jon, man. He's got something about him, man. You know. Wary but excited, Arya checked the hall. Nymeria, here, guard. She left the wolf out there to warn of intruders and closed the door. But then Jon had pulled off the rags he'd wrapped it in. He held it out for her. Arya's eyes went wide, dark eyes, like his. A sword, she said in a small, hushed breath. The scabbard was soft gray leather, supple as sin. Jon drew out the blade slowly so she could see the deep blue sheen of the steel. This is no toy, he told her. Be careful you don't cut yourself. The edges are sharp enough to shave with. Girls don't shave, Arya said. This is the whole thing about, like, pointing, you know, we're establishing the gender roles here and talking about them. Maybe they should. Have you seen Septa's legs? She giggled. It's so skinny. Now, while it is true that, like, most women's roles are like Sansa's, it's still, in the actual Middle Ages, there were tons of exceptions. You can just Google warrior women or fighting women, and you will have a million of them. You know, like, there were plenty of women that were trained for battle, trained to defend their keep in case the Lord was away, that sort of thing. It was not unheard of for women to learn fighting. And even in Ice and Fire, we have just so many women that are taught how to fight. I mean, the Mormonts here in the north, Mira Reed, Brienne of Tarth, Black Alley, you know, like, historically we have Visenya, you know, like, you have all of these everyone in Dorne, every freaking person in Dorne. And so it's a little weird that Arya's, you know, feels so trapped. And maybe it's just the way Septa Mordane and her mother are, but there's so many examples in story and so many examples in history of fighting women, that, you know, Jon giving her a blade and Ned saying, okay, yeah, we can get you trained, is actually not that unusual. I mean, at least, I'm not saying it's common, but it's not like unheard of, you know. It's like saying left-handedness is uncommon, but is less common than right-handedness. But obviously there's a million left-handed people, you know, or being a redhead, you know, only like 2% of people are redheads, but they're everywhere, right? You know, like this sort of thing. It's like, so fighting women, it's like, yes, you can say very small percentage of women are going to be trained in fighting, but at the same time, there's plenty there, you know, it's one of those situations. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't want to say it's like a little retconned. I mean, it is odd that they never had the conversation about the Mormons. Like, oh, you know, here in the North, there are those Mormon women, or something. So I would say there is some retconning with the number, like, of how Arya should feel trapped here. The same with, like, Jon's bastardy, you know. We find so many exceptions of like bastards who do great and are powerful in Ice and Fire. It's so skinny. So are you. I had Mick make this special. The Bravos use blades like this in Pentos and Mira and the other free cities. It won't hack a man's head off, but it can poke him full of holes if you're fast enough. So somebody pointed out that the Bravo is a sword term from, like, Venice, of a certain time. Not exactly hugely used, but, you know, it's this is where it comes from. But the rapier, or you know, what she has, thin-bladed sword, whether it's a rapier or a tuck or a short sword or whatever, small sword, doesn't really matter. These did exist, these thin blades. They're mainly for dueling. They weren't used in battle very much because, you know, when you swing a blade at an armored person, if it doesn't cut through the armor, you're at least whacking them with force and power and shaking them and hurting them in the sense they're getting a pound. So a thin blade is not really going to be able to do that with a swipe. So this was for dueling, civilian use, essentially. These thin rapier blades, which is what she has. I can be fast, Arya said. You have to work at it every day. He put the sword in her hand, showed her how to hold it, and stepped back. How does it feel? Do you like the balance? And actually, I was thinking about that. You know, like Arya later on, like, is she ever going to be in a field battle? And if she's ever in a field battle, is she going to have needle? Because it's not the greatest sword for a field battle. You know, it suits her now. You know, because she's running around cities, and she's running around cities. Her sword isn't even with her. It's still buried. But you know, when she's gonna have it later, you know, is it gonna suit her? Do you like the balance? I do. First lesson: sticking with the pointy end. Jon gave him a whap in the arm with the flat of her blade. The blow stung, but Jon found himself grinning like an idiot. I know which end to use, Arya said. A doubtful look crossed her face. Septon Mordain will take it away from me. Not if she doesn't know you have it, Jon said. Who will I practice with? You'll find someone, Jon promised her. King's Landing is a true city, 1,000 times the size of Winterfell. Until you find a partner, watch how they fight in the yard. Run, hide, make yourself strong. And whatever you do, don't tell Sansa. This is setting up the butcher's boy, finding a partner, because essentially, you know, had this not happened, if you're going with the what ifs, the butcher's boy wouldn't have been dueling with her. Jon messed up her hair. I will miss you, little sister. Keeps calling her little sister. It's kind of, you know, very creepy considering that there's the original, when written, this was supposed to be romantic, or eventually romantic. Suddenly she looked up like she was going to cry. I wish you were coming with us. Different roads sometimes lead to the same castle. Who knows? All roads lead to Rome, I suppose. He was feeling better now. He was not going to let himself be sad. I better go. I'll spend my first year on the wall emptying chamber pots if I keep Uncle Ben waiting any longer. The last Uncle Ben. Arya ran to him for a last hug. Put down the sword first, Jon warned her, laughing. She set it aside almost shyly and showered him with kisses. When he turned back to the door, she was holding it again, trying it for balance. I almost forgot, he told her. All the best swords have names. Like ice, she said. She looked at the blade with her hands. Does it have a name? Oh, tell me. Can you guess, Jon teased. Your favorite thing. Almost unrealistically, they come to the same conclusion. Arya seemed puzzled at first. Then it came to her. She was quick. Then they said it together. Needle. I don't think realistically she would have, you know, come to that conclusion. The memory of her laughter warmed him on the long ride north. Anyway, a very quick and very quick, memorable chapter. I think people really, really remember this one. And, you know, not only because it was put in the show, but it's so important for establishing how the characters relate to each other. You know, the Robin Jon and the Robin Arya scenes being so essential. And a lot of these quotes are brought back, like sticking with the pointy end and the snowflakes in the hair and things like this. A lot of these things are brought back. The big question is like, is the Jon and Bran scene the important thing, or does the plot really demand that Catelyn and Jon have resolution? Or is the Catelyn Jon resolution, one could perhaps say that this is all leading to why he didn't take Stannis' offer and stays in the Night's Watch. One could say that this leads to that scene. This is not your place, that kind of thing. But anyway, quite a nice chapter. Quite almost all dialogue. Really, really, really well done. Very simple, breezy, quick, straight to the point. Established what it needed to establish quite well. Even if the Catelyn part is so over the top. So over the top. It should have been you. Anyway, thank you all, and we'll continue on. See you next time.